Welcome back to State and Local Government and Politics. My name is Jim Toot, and I'm an Associate Professor of Political Science at Central Virginia Community College. Module 3, Sustainability. Part 1, Introduction and Basic Model of Public Policy Innovation. American state and local governments face very difficult challenges which involve issues that have evolved both slowly over a long time, as well as issues that are newly salient due to the advent of post-industrial society and the globalization of commerce and industry. Both domestic migration and the immigration by foreigners contribute to a shifting population and changing community demographics in many areas of the country. Domestic migration refers to rural community residents continuing to move to the nation's major cities. This is particularly the case for young professional men and women who have acquired some degree of higher education. Because of these changes, state and local government public agencies in many areas are struggling to meet the social and economic needs of an ever-changing population. Infrastructure development, including broadband access and maintenance of the built environment, have become growing concerns in many communities across the nation. As local communities evolve towards their new futures, the governmental response to global societal change and changing local conditions must match the new perspective of community sustainability. Private sector firms are no longer maintaining their loyalty and reliable ties to local communities. Globalization has meant that worldwide markets greatly affect business location and tenure in particular locations. The business sector itself is more fluid and dynamic and virtual due to telecommuting and internet capability. Business owners increasingly work with consultants, contractors, and employees in Asia, Europe, Africa, or the Middle East, rather than pay salaries to local workers for the desired services rendered. The private sector is more ad hoc than ever before in human history. The long-standing American tradition of the active promotion of civic life has diminished dramatically. Some new institutions have arisen, but they tend to be quite different from those social institutions whose benefits historically contributed to a small-scale local quality of life and public welfare. Some of these new forms of interaction among people are based in ephemeral internet spaces, chat rooms and the like, while others entail only superficial interpersonal engagement and or revolving door memberships that grow or recede largely based on the nature of the times. A set of transactions that state and local governments must adapt to concerns the often dramatic population shifts, the growing presence of the private sector in civic life, and the relative lack of human interaction in contemporary American culture. So how do American state and local governments tend to operate under these rapidly changing circumstances? Earlier notions of state and local government responsibility and scope of influence must be considered as a starting point. However, in times of change, the treasured value of stalwartness and loyalty to tradition must give way in some important areas of activity to the recognition of the need for continual and timely innovation if public institutions and state and local government are to remain relevant to the people they serve. Basic model of public policy innovation. Public policy innovation in the U.S. is seldom a function of one person's ability or efforts, as might be the case in more centralized and autocratic regimes. Innovation in U.S. state and local governments is most nearly always a function of openness to change and willingness to risk the unknown consequences of the adoption of new approaches to old and new problems alike in political, social, and economic institutions in which elected and appointed leaders and citizen stakeholders live, work, make choices, and express their policy preferences. Research conducted in this area is quite plentiful, and this research clearly suggests that there are several common preconditions or factors that tend to facilitate public policy innovation. Of paramount importance in this regard is the issue of political trust. Political trust is the expectation of a citizen that the rules and practices derived from public institutions are fair and unbiased, that the performance of a political institution competent and appropriate, and that the rules and procedures encourage innovation and produce outcomes that improve governance and society. Political trust relates in part to the process of governance and to the public institutions within which key decisions are made. Key questions to consider are the following. Are the institutional rules and practices derived from public institutions viewed as fair and unbiased? Do these institutional rules and procedures encourage innovation and produce outcomes that improve governance in society? Social trust is of equal importance, and this condition relates to the ways in which people interact with one another publicly and privately, and is often a function of our individual experiences as well as the institutions through which we interact. A concern in contemporary American culture is the growing isolation of the individual and a related decline in social as well as political trust, which follow from that social isolation. The overarching theme of these studies of political culture is the critical role of social capital, the values and norms held by citizens that reflect trust in others, the active pursuit of engagement in networks of interpersonal relations of a wide variety, and standards of interchange among people involving the principles of reciprocity, return a favor with a favor, and mutual respect. Demographic characteristics of the settings within which American state and local government function are also of importance in the study of public policy innovation and capacity of state and local governments to adapt to societal change. Demographics include such things as socioeconomic conditions, race and ethnicity makeup of a community, geographical location, the size of area, population as well as geographic concentration and dispersal. Socioeconomic conditions relate not only to the relative wealth or poverty present in a state or community, but also to the distribution of wealth. Relevant socioeconomic factors also include the education level and type of employment of residents. Wealth, health, and level of education greatly influence the capacity of citizens to participate in the governing process, wherein they can express their policy preferences and assess proposed policy innovations. Innovation usually means doing something new for the first time, or doing something of long-standing practice somewhat differently, and in the process accepting some element of risk in the hope of producing a better future. Without some degree of wealth, the capacity to assume the risks of innovation is limited. Without health and education, it is difficult to summon the energy and comprehend the need to be innovative. Also, lack of health and education often leads to extreme caution and fear of change, usually among the very people for whom innovation would be the most beneficial. The racial and ethnic composition of communities plays a very significant role in public policy and policy innovation. In the U.S., racial and ethnic diversity not only shapes citizens' perspectives of many policy dilemmas, but also influence how state and local governments come to adopt or avoid considering timely, innovative policy solutions. Innovation tends to occur more often in those communities where the diversity of public views of stakeholders is actively incorporated into the public policymaking process. The changing demographic composition of many states and communities across the country requires considerable innovation to meet the needs of increasingly complex local communities. There is strength in the range of perspectives on a problem afforded us by diversity, and public policy innovations that build on this strength are much more likely to succeed than those that take a narrow focus on the problem to be addressed. Location. There's an old saying in the real estate business world, namely three things: location, location, and location determine success. Somewhat the same observation may be made of public policy innovation. Some locations are considerably more amenable to innovation than others. However, nearly every place in the world has some noteworthy limitation or another, and some have many apparent limitations. Successful policy innovators can identify the assets of nearly any location, that is, place-based strengths upon which successful innovation can be built. Many Midwestern, Northern Plains, and Rocky Mountain states and local rural areas have lost substantial population due to the decline in family farming. Nonetheless, public and private policy entrepreneurs, often working in partnership, have developed innovations that have slowed economic decline in many agrarian areas and strengthened community-based social and economic benefits. Wind turbines have appeared on the same plains where the nation's grains are still produced, supplementing the incomes of local farmers and building clean, renewable energy for future generations. Size of population and extent of geographic area are also important considerations in policy innovation. Metropolitan areas have the advantage of being concentrated in terms of population and infrastructure, conditions that make the implementation of some types of policy innovations easier. Many rural areas, in contrast, face several major challenges with respect to innovation. Not only are many rural areas becoming increasingly diverse, but the physical distances between small communities typical in rural areas makes innovation difficult to formulate and difficult to implement. The dispositions of political and social leaders clearly shape the policy innovation formulation and determine the likelihood of success as well. Innovation involves moving in new directions, often into a somewhat unknown future. Leadership is a key element in innovation because an effective leader is capable of not only conceptualizing future conditions, but a leader also can identify policy innovations that will create desirable future outcomes. In many policy arenas, innovation involves more than elected leaders taking the initiative. Innovation often also requires that local and social business leaders play a significant role in developing and implementing innovation. Policy innovation is facilitated to a considerable degree by bureaucratic capacity. The administrative agencies of state and local government play a significant role in formulating and implementing policy innovations. Bureaucratic capacity involves well-trained professionals working in public organizations to meet political and social goals through the timely development and effective implementation of public policy. Attracting and retaining professional, experienced, and well-educated people to key positions in public agencies requires that those agencies be adequately funded, professional in operation, and effectively organized to meet ever-changing needs and ambitious goals set out in the policy innovation enterprise. Bureaucratic capacity is the ability of government agencies to attract and retain professionals to bureaucratic positions and requires public agencies to be relatively well-funded, professional in operation, and effectively organized. In Part 2, we will discuss infrastructure renewal and water and waste systems.